Switching topics now, the clock is ticking for former President Donald Trump, who is vowing to fight the ruling in his New York civil fraud case all the way up to the Supreme Court. Right now, he has until Monday to pay a $454 million bond or face seizure of his possessions. Joining me now is Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen. He is the author of Revenge, How Donald Trump Weaponized the U.S. Department of Justice Against His Critics. Michael, thank you for joining us again tonight. You know Trump very well. I mean, you and I met when you were with Trump. You were like one of his children for a while, so you know him well. What is going on with him right now in his mind when he faces such a massive penalty in just 48 hours? I know a few people that know his thinking better than you.
He's exceptionally angry. He doesn't believe that consequences apply to him. And remember, this is a guy who inherited a ton of money and a business from his father. And he grew it. We can't argue that. He grew the business. But basically what he's watching is the entire family legacy coming to a screeching halt.
The brand he built as a successful businessman, his brand, he was not an elected official till he went to the White House. And the brand he built is now basically destroyed. Is that bothering him? Is he concerned about that? Is that why he's not talking about filing for bankruptcy?
Well, sure. First of all, bankruptcy may not actually be an option for him. The old bankruptcy laws that you and I remember from 20, 25 years ago, very different than the bankruptcy laws today. And I'm not so sure that it would protect him, even if he filed bankruptcy. Remember, he then has to list every single asset. He has to then, allow Tish James or the receiver to potentially secure those in order to secure bankruptcy protection. It's a much more complicated situation than just filing for bankruptcy and staying the proceeding.
Now, at the same time that Trump's lawyers were arguing he could not possibly pay his bond, claiming he'd been rejected by 30 lenders, Trump was on his Truth Social platform, where he's not under oath, saying he had almost $500 million in cash. I mean, his lawyers are saying one thing under oath. He's saying another thing not under oath. What's going on there?
Well, in fact, he actually did say under oath that he has more than $400+ million in the bank, that he's has the best assets around, that they're very low leverage, and he's flushed with cash. So which one is it? Is he flushed with cash or is he not? Clearly, the answer is he's not, because if he was, he would have actually done something to stay off Monday's Tish James seizure. And she will do exactly what she has said. I don't have to tell you, our unsinkable New York Attorney General has no qualms about going after bank accounts and seizing properties.
Let me go right there. New York State Attorney General Letitia James has reportedly begun taking steps towards seizing Trump's assets, should that be necessary. Trump himself has started talking about that possibility openly. Do you worry about his using this situation to create a showdown designed to inflame his supporters?
Well, of course he's going to do it. Anything that makes him into a victim, he will try to use in order to suck more money out of his supporters. He is the great grifter in chief. But you may remember, Rev, when I was testifying for the late, great Elijah Cummings in the House Oversight Committee, the very first things I said, Donald Trump is a liar, he's a cheat, and he's a con man. Again, I was right. It's exactly what I had said early on in 2018 when I warned the country exactly who Donald Trump is.
Now, this civil fraud case is one of many complicated and expensive legal proceedings Trump is embroiled in as he, his family, and his most loyal allies are assuming control of nearly the entire fundraising apparatus of the Republican Party. Some large contributors are already worried about how much party money will go to Trump's legal expenses. I mean, we're talking about the $450 million with the civil case, but we also have 4 cases with 4 teams of lawyers and court costs. This is a lot of money he's having to have to deal with. Now, again, you know Trump. What should donors be thinking about before they sign more checks, either to his campaign or to the RNC?
Yeah, well, know where your money is going before you send the money, right? If you want to make a donation to Donald for this $450 million, that's up to you. Go ahead. There's plenty of billionaire donors that seem to be doing this. They're running, I think it's even tonight at Mar-a-Lago, they're running an event. It's $800,000 a plate. That's still not going to get him to where he needs to be for the bond. But the real issue, and I keep
and then the 4 cases after.
Oh, that's for sure. Pay for that. But the real issue that we have to think about, Rev, is not even about this bond. And I talk about this every time I'm on any television show or I'm on dealing with the news. It's not about the 454. It's where he gets the money from. Because if he borrows the money from one of these mega billionaire donors, he becomes indebted to that individual, and that places America's security in danger. But not even as much as if he takes the money from a foreign entity. Now, all of a sudden, he's indebted to a foreign entity. It could be an ally. It could be an adversary, which, again, makes it even worse. This is what we need to be concentrating on, not even just so much the money. If he doesn't come up with the money, Tish James is doing what Tish James is going to do. But if he does get the money, where did he get it from? And by knowing Donald the way I do, it'll come through a multitude of shell companies. It's going to be very difficult to find out where the original dollars come from. He'll know, and again, that'll place America's national security in major jeopardy.
Yeah, well, that's scary, a national security risk. Let me ask you this. Are you having to be available to testify at any of these upcoming 4 trials?
Well, the very first one, I've been subpoenaed to testify before the Manhattan District Attorney's case.
This is the hush money case.
It's called the hush money case, right. Yes, that they're going to court on Monday in order to determine when the start of the trial will take place.
Do you expect the trial to take place before the election?
Oh, absolutely.
So Donald Trump will go on trial, criminal trial, before the election.
And there will also be a decision, in my opinion.
And you will be a witness.
And I will be a witness.
Michael Cohen, thank you for coming in. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Ralph.
All right. You can listen to Michael's podcast, Mea Culpa, Nothing But the Truth, anywhere you get your podcasts. My thanks again to Michael Cohen.